I talked a little bit before in my last video, 3 keys on how you could become successful. I looked back at, how I used to live my life, and, I wanted to make another video about, some other things that you have to do to become successful. Like, if you use those 3 keys, you'll become successful, but there's other things that you need to put aside if you want to become successful. So, number 1, I already talked about this, and I'm going to mention it again because it's super, super important. A lot of people struggle with this, and, they don't realize how much it holds them back. So the number 1 thing is you need to put aside lust, because like I mentioned all the time, if you keep looking at lustful things, that's going to consume your mind all the time. You're never going to have enough time to think about any good ideas. You're never going to have enough time to, better yourself, because if you even watch something for 5 minutes in the morning, you're going to be thinking about that all day. If you watch something lustful in the morning, you're going to be thinking about that throughout the day. You're not going to have any time to think about anything good that can make you money, any good thoughts, any thoughts of bettering yourself, because you're constantly going to be consumed by that lust. And the number 2 thing is stop being lazy, because if you're lazy, you're never going to want to even you might keep thinking to yourself, oh, I'll start this tomorrow, or I'll eventually become successful. But laziness is tricky. Actually, it's not tricky. Laziness is just laziness. If you keep being lazy, you're never going to see any sort of progress in your life. You're going to stay stagnant because you're always choosing the easier path. If you can go do something and you're not doing it because you think somebody else is going to do it for you, you're never going to become successful. For example, let's say you're friends with somebody and you're relying on them to start a business and drag you along with it, because you see the person that you might be friends with, he's more motivated than you. You see that drive in him and you're counting on him for your success. But, instead, why don't you just partner up with him? Why don't you stop being lazy? Why don't you go bring him an idea? He's driven, you bring him the idea, and then you guys both sit down and work it out. And, if you keep being lazy, you're never going to become successful, because you can't rely on other people for your success. You might get opportunities. People will bring ideas to you, and if you don't ever act on that, you're never going to become successful. The third thing is find a business that makes sense. So let's say you understand online business, find something online. I personally don't know much about online business, so that's not how I made my money. I was in I opened up a service-based business, so I'm in something that's called aviation refinement. So, if you don't understand online business, maybe start some kind of other business, maintenance shop, a service-based business like I did, detailing, whatever it is. Just find a business that makes sense and stick to it. Don't give up if you don't see any results in 2, 3, 4 months, because for me, the first 2 years when I started my business, did I have work? Yes, but it was extremely slow and I was not making, anywhere near a livable wage. And so, I stuck through those hard times because I believed that God has a good plan for me, with this business. I wasn't lazy, like I said before in my other points, I stuck to it. I wasn't lazy. I did every single day what I'm supposed to do. And, while I wasn't making a lot of money through my aviation refinement business, I was still doing other stuff. I was finding side hustles. I was still hustling and making money. So, if you want to become successful, just remember, don't be lazy, don't be lustful, and, find a business that works. Not that works. Any business works as long as you stick to it. So find a business that works for you and stick to it.